Great, thanks very much, Bailey. I'm presuming this is working and you can all hear me. Thank you for tuning in. This afternoon, I'm just going to give you it's a bit of an introduction to what I think are two really crucial frameworks for technology and the public sector. Before I get into it, briefly about myself, I've spent most of my career in public procurement on the other side of the table. So I was the head of procurement for the Olympic Delivery Authority, and then I was the commercial director of the Home Office. And then about 3.5 years ago, I decided I would leave and I would help SMEs and new entrants to the market to engage and to win government contracts, because I thought the government needs new suppliers. And so that's what I've been doing across all different categories, and not just technology, but coincidentally, my first client, I helped them to get a £20 million contract on G-Cloud for prison-based prison software technology. And then I've just been helping my most recent client with DOS to win a £20 million contract with HMRC. So all of it is quite live in my mind. But today, just to highlight what I'm going to be talking about, I think we'll start with what these frameworks are. And if I was saying to you, do you know what a framework is, you might all be looking a bit quizzical, and I'll explain what that is, why it's important that you join them, and valuable that you do, the mechanics of how you do get onto these frameworks. Then I'll be explaining why that's not the end of the story. You then need to be marketing yourself as you would do in any other business. Before we then look at the specifics of the bidding process, and I'll cover some wider bidding tips too, and also what to do if it doesn't work out, which is important. So what are they? If I say to you, what are frameworks, and you might look a bit blank, and lots of people say the word framework. Politicians use the word framework a lot, and it all means different things to different people. In the public sector, frameworks are effectively preferred supplier lists, as you would have in the private sector. So this is a way for the government and the public sector to go quickly to normally a short list of people and choose from them to deliver what it is they're buying. And in this case, we're talking about the G-Cloud, which is for cloud-based technology and support to all the services that come around cloud-based technology. It has 4 specific lots: software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and special cloud services, which is everything around those things. For example, help assisting in migration to cloud hosting. All the consultancy services around that are there. So if your offering, your product is around the cloud, G-Cloud is the one for you to get into the whole public sector. Sort of hand in hand with it, and both of these things are part of something called the digital marketplace, which it's all intended to really change the way that the public sector buys technology. And DOS is digital outcomes and specialists, and this is all about people. So it's either providing whole teams of people, which is digital outcomes, which is one of the lots. Providing individual specialists, so that's digital specialists. So that might be Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, DevOps architects. User research studios, so providing a facility, and user research participants. But the main ones that I've seen and I've been involved in are in outcomes, are in specialists within DOS. So if you provide those types of people, if you're used to engaging in that agile development methodology, then DOS is the one for you to be involved in. And both of these they're both quite strategic initiatives to change the way that the government buys IT, which obviously has not had a great history in the past. To do it in a much smaller and more agile basis, and also to engage with SMEs, which is important. They're interesting frameworks because normally and going back to what is a framework, normally you have to do a lot of work in bidding for a framework, almost as if you're bidding for a big contract, and the buyer will evaluate your bids and decide between them to get to a short list of people who are going to do the work. In G-Cloud and DOS, you effectively decide yourself whether you want to be on the framework, because it's very straightforward, and I'll get into what's involved. But they're also different in that normal frameworks refresh themselves or re-tendered every 4 years. But G-Cloud and DOS refresh themselves every sort of 12 to 18 months. So we're on the 9th episode of the G-Cloud and the 3rd DOS. And so that if you didn't get on it previously, or you didn't get on it this time, you have a chance in quite a short time frame to get onto the framework again, which is valuable. And it's open to all of the public sector, so central government and the wider public sector, so schools, universities, police, fire, local authorities. It's open to all of them, but in fairness, it is mainly government that uses both of these frameworks. But also, interestingly, for you and for new entrants, it's not the traditional, very hard to get into, you must have a massive turnover type of procurement. It's intended to reduce the barriers to entry to SMEs. So there aren't turnover requirements in either of these frameworks at all. As I said, they're mainly self-certifying. And consequently, there are lots of SMEs on there, and lots of SMEs that won't work on both of them, and we'll come to that too. So all in all, these are very interesting and different ways of public procurement to operate. And if you're in those technology sectors, you need to be thinking about getting onto them. And thinking particularly what's in it for you, these are by far the easiest ways that I know of for you to access public sector contracts and to give you a public sector contracting vehicle. All of the rest of it is much harder and more difficult to get onto. So if you want to find a way, a channel, a sales channel, a contracting channel for the public sector that works all the way across, both of these frameworks are right for you. Then, as I said, they're designed to be open to SME, and it's maybe not been as successful as the government had hoped, but it has been pretty successful. So 46% of G-Cloud sales are to SME, this is by value, and 35% of DOS sales are to SME by value. And both of those measures are much, much higher than they are in the rest of government and the rest of public sector spend. So if as we all should be, we're following the money, this is a good indicator of what you should be looking at. And lastly, there's a bit of sort of collateral benefit there that once you get onto these, and as I said, it's quite easy to get onto these frameworks, you can genuinely say that you're a government supplier, and you'll get a nice little logo to put on your website, and it's all good for a bit of credibility. So again, it's all good. But I say it's not without controversy, and it's not without controversy, and this is the sort of flip side of the nature of these frameworks, in that unlike a normal framework where you're only one of 4 people, you've got a pretty good chance that you're going to see some actual work coming through it, and you've got a very good chance that you're going to win it because you're 1 of 4. But in these frameworks, there might be there are thousands of suppliers of them. And so if you don't do some work to try and make yourself known and market yourself and get access to opportunities, there are lots of people who haven't got any work on them. And so that's the controversial part of it. This isn't you have to be proactive. So to start at the beginning, how do you get on? How do you get onto these frameworks? It is the sort of well, it is at the moment, pending the end of March, the normal OJU official journal, the European Union procurement procedure, which is everything over sort of £140,000 of services. But as I said, instead of you writing great reams of tender responses, this is all designed to be light touch and self-certifying. So most of what you have to do is just click different checkboxes and confirm that you perform things in different ways and in compliance with different standards, answer yes, no questions. It's all pretty straightforward. You do need to set out what you're going to offer. So the digital marketplace that I mentioned, you will need to describe what you provide, pretty briefly, what you provide and how you do it. You will need to think about your pricing and your rate card, and you'll need your terms and conditions, particularly for G-Cloud, which does sound a bit of maybe a blank sheet for you if you're not used to this, but certainly for the G-Cloud, one of the unique features of the G-Cloud is that it's very transparent. And by that I mean you can log in now into the G-Cloud and search it and see who is on the G-Cloud, see who provide. You can search for the type of thing that you provide. You can see who else is doing it, how they're describing it, how much they charge for it. And if you go to the sales data, and there's sales data for G-Cloud and DOS, you can see who's winning work on it. So between all of those different things, you can work out what you think is the best in class, and maybe you could develop it and move it on a bit. So you don't necessarily have to start from zero. But as I said, these aren't frameworks where you can sit back and wait for the work to come to you. You need to market yourself. And fundamentally, this is about big organizations will always try and not bid blind. So they're not just picking something, they're picking something up from a search channel and deciding, well, I want to go for that in a sort of shotgun approach. They've looked at it much, planned and engaged. They've decided who they want which clients they want to work with. They know what their work pipeline is, and they'll be planning specific tenders and specific bids from a long way out so that they're ready and their ducks are all in a row. So this is all about not bidding blind. And sort of to the nitty-gritty of it is that the buyer needs to know who you are. It's not impossible that you can win work in any of the public sector bidding blind, but you always want to enhance your chances, and enhancing your chances is the buyer, and behind the buyer, the actual end user, having heard of you and thinking, oh, I know who they are, I've got some idea of what they do. It just makes the whole process work better for you. So you need to market yourself, and you market yourself in the same way that you already would. Despite the public sector telling you, oh, you can't market yourself and you can't engage with us, that's not true. You need to be finding out who the key stakeholders are. You need to be writing to them. You need to be trying to meet them. You need to go to trade fairs. If you get a meet the buyer event, you see an advert for that, you need to go to it, because you will learn about the buyer and they will learn about you. So you need to engage. And you need to decide who you're going to engage with. And in these the sales figures, you can see who is using G-Cloud and who is using DOS, and you can see how much they spend in the contracts. You can see what types of things the contracts are for. And so from all that information, you can decide, we are capable of servicing this type of size of contract, and we want to deal with this type of department or organization. So you need to have a strategy there. And the tactical point about the project lifecycle is that you can't let infinite contracts in government. They all have an end. So if you've seen a contract, oh, that's exactly what we do, you look at when it's going to end, and 6 months before that, you engage with the buyer and then say, I provide a similar thing to what you've contracted for. I see your contract is coming towards an end. Can we come and meet and explain to you what we can do as part of your market testing, for example. The last point there is very good preparation, and it's part of when you're deciding who you want to engage with. You need to think of how you specifically are going to help them, what problems they're facing, and what you deliver will help them. You need to be thinking about what you've done before and your experience and how you've helped different clients. And I said that there are lower barriers to entry. You don't have had to have worked in the public sector before to win work or get onto either of these frameworks, but you do need to have done it before for someone, and you need to pull together that information of what it was, what the benefits were. It needs to be very hard and very tangible. It can never just be your opinion. The DOS and to an extent the G-Cloud have a bidding process. I say to an extent because G-Cloud is intended to be a catalogue, if you like, where the buyer is flipping through the catalogue and they're choosing one or two or three people that they want to compare, and they're just supposed to compare what the listings are, and on that basis decide which one they want to go with. Of course, it doesn't always work like that, and buyers normally ask for a more detailed proposal from the G-Cloud, even though they're not supposed to. In DOS, it's not a catalogue. You always have to bid. But as I mentioned before, the bidding process is much lighter than a traditional procurement process. So in DOS, there are two stages. There's the skills and experience stage, which is basically looking backwards, and then a proposal stage, which is looking forwards about what you will do for that client. And the skills and experience stage is quite like an HR, a sort of a job specification. So it will list out the essential experience, and it will list out nice to have experience, and then you will provide within 100-word answers an example of where you've done what they're looking for. So an example where you've scaled up a Scrum team, or an example of where you've worked on migrating from private infrastructure to public cloud. So in that stage, it's got to be very to the point. There's no time for marketing words. This is all about in our contract with X, and as I said, it doesn't have to be public sector, it could be private sector. In our contract with Acme, we delivered this by doing this, and this was the outcome. And it has to be as clear and as hard as that. Then you get through that, you have a proposal stage, and this is where you're going to be setting out what you're, again, quite briefly, relative to other public sector procurement, you'll be setting out what you propose to do, how you'll do it, what the architecture will be, how you will resource it, who are the key people, and how much it will cost. It will be quite technical, so you will need some input from that, but you also want to make sure it is understandable. You want to make sure that you've answered all the questions where they're asked, and we'll come to that. The interesting thing about DOS is that it has a large part, often around sort of 10% on cultural fit and how you'll work with the client, because it's a much more people-based thing. So that means that if you get invited to a proposal stage, which is great, you need to bring in your main sort of delivery leads, bring in the people who are going to be doing it. But it's great because you've then got an opportunity to talk to and engage with the buyer and influence them towards you. I'll bring in some wider bidding tips because they're equally as valid for DOS and G-Cloud as they are for anything of the rest of the public sector. The first big thing that you need to, when you're looking at a bid, is you need to understand the evaluation weighting, and by that I mean how much of the 100% of the marks available, how much of that is going to be on quality, technical, so typically sort of 70%, and how much is going to be on price. Typically say 30%, 20-30%. Within that technical 70%, there will be a breakdown, and you need to match. So, and in that breakdown, they're saying which bits of the process or the service are most important to them, and you need to match your effort to that. So this is really telling you what's important to the client, and you need to respect that and deliver on it. The next one, which is always the same, is this is basically exam technique and it's discipline. So you must answer the question where it's asked. You never cross-refer because you can't assume the evaluator will take up the reference. Always answer the question where it's asked completely. You're not referring to your website. You're not referring to appendices. It's got to be answered where the question is. You've got to be disciplined. You need to it needs to be consistent in what you're saying, and play to your strengths. I think it's very well received in the public sector when an SME wins a competition, particularly against some of the big boys. So there's no harm in mentioning it. There's no harm in saying that you are an SME. And my last point was that you just to be aware there that the big players, when they're bidding, they're saying is bid to win, deliver to margin. And what that means is they're bidding very competitively to win the public state, to win the tender in competition with others, knowing that when they're in a big contract, particularly for a long contract, the contract will likely change, particularly in technology. And when that contract changes, you can start to recover your margin. So just consider that as a tactic. I mentioned their mystery shopper, and that's something run by the Cabinet Office, where if you have an opportunity but you feel there's something wrong with it, rather than waiting and getting to a challenge situation afterwards, which I'd never really recommend, to be honest, you can go to the mystery shopper website and anonymously say, I'm looking at this opportunity and it's only given me a week to respond, or it looks like it's favoured towards a particular provider. You can anonymously tell them and they'll pick it up with the buyer and hopefully remedy it in process. So you do get a good opportunity. It's just a good way of reporting that something isn't maybe right. If you lose, and it is important, because if you decided you want to get into the public sector, you probably won't get it right the first few times, but you have committed a lot of time and effort to doing this, and don't just walk away in sort of anger and disgust, because then you've lost all that effort. If you lose, you need to make sure you get some feedback on your bid, and it's in the buyer's interest to give you that feedback, because they want more people to be more competitive. They want a stronger marketplace for what they're looking for. So if you lose, take a deep breath and then say, please, can we have a debrief? And the bigger the contract, the more likely this is, but if you can, always try and get a face-to-face debrief. And when you get your debrief, the first, to set the scene, you want to be very clear that you're not interested in challenging them. This isn't a nasty, aggressive situation. You just want to get better. And the reason why I say that is that the public sector buyers are always wary of being challenged. And if they feel that there is a possibility of being challenged, they're going to clam up, and they're only going to give you very safe feedback, which couldn't then be fed back, couldn't then be used against them. So by assuring the buyer that this isn't a contentious situation, you just want to get better, you're encouraging them to be more frank and open with you, and that's to your benefit. And then once you're discussing it, you say, well, we haven't got much time, because you won't get much time. You say, well, let's start with where we were worse. What was our worst answer? How could that be better? And then you work your way through. And last point there, if you get the chance, you may as well ask for a debrief. Even if you win, you can always be better. So really, to finish up my points from there, and again, as I said, it's only really an introduction. These DOS and G-Cloud are relatively very easy ways to build a sales channel for the public sector. So for that reason, it's well worth signing on to them. But the flip side of being easy to get onto is that you need to work hard to sell to the public sector, and then use the channels that you've built. So you can use the transparency, which is pretty unique in the public sector, of DOS and especially G-Cloud, to find out who is buying and who's buying the type of thing you're selling, and build a sort of strategic target plan, and market yourself to those people you've targeted to engage with, and give them a coherent, and give them a strong elevator pitch, a strong hook of why you're going to help them solve their problems. Last point, and it's true across all bidding, that bidding is a discipline, and you must be credible. So it's not marketing flip flap, and it's not we think we're great. It's this is what we have done. It's got to be as dry and factual as the rest of the public sector. I've got my details on there. As I said, I now run a consultancy, and we help people bid. If people decide that this contract is a must-win, or they're repeatedly failing, then I engage and I help them to succeed, and my hit rate is pretty high. So if you've got any questions, then please do get in touch. And that's it for the introduction. So maybe now your questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John. Yeah, and as he said, any questions that you have separately, his details are here, and I will share them again as well afterwards. First question, which is typed in during, which I think I actually know the answer to, is can you explain what the G Cloud stands for? And I think it stands for Government Cloud. Is that right?
It does stand for Government Cloud, although there isn't really a specific Government Cloud. There is a range of public cloud infrastructure, but it does stand for Government Cloud, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so the first question on the list that we have, we've got a few to go through, is how do I look for contract opportunities? So you've kind of already gone over that with G Cloud and the other one as well, but that is just one that they want it. Are they the only two that you really have to focus on in terms of the public sector?
Well, unfortunately, the government did try and bring all of it together with something called Contracts Finder, which is intended to produce or to capture all of the different opportunities across the whole of the UK public sector. The problem with it is that it's driven by the Cabinet Office, and the Cabinet Office only has responsibility for central government or control in central government, and the wider public sector, schools, authorities, universities, NHS are freer to do what they want. So certainly Contracts Finder is worth a look. For the digital marketplace, that's quite straightforward. I mean, you can go straight to the digital marketplace itself. If you search for DOS, you can find live opportunities and register for them as they come up. The same for G Cloud. But I think there's no great single answer, unfortunately.
I think that kind of answers this next question as well, that has just come in, which asked how do you get access to the G Cloud, and you just can find that all online. Is that right?
Yeah, there's loads. The government has got loads and loads of information on what it is, how to apply. It's all just search for G Cloud. There's a lot of very clear information on how to do it and what's involved.
Perfect, thank you. Another question that we have is, does the government pay suppliers on time?
The government does pay suppliers on time. It's one of the strengths of government that all the departments' payment records are analysed, and they have to report on how promptly they pay, especially to SMEs. So they do, and they also want their main strategic big suppliers also to sign up to pay their supply chain on time. So the answer is definitely yes.
Which is definitely a good thing for the people in this cohort as well, considering payment terms are a big thing when trying to get new contracts. Final question that we do have. Oh, sorry, we've got another one come through as well from the viewers. Is how do you register for new contracts? I presume that's the same as just going onto the G Cloud website and other websites, and then just registering through there.
Yeah, if it's G Cloud and DOS, then you can register with both of them. You can register on Contracts Finder. Again, as I said, unfortunately, there's not a great single answer unless you're looking specifically on those frameworks. There's across the whole of the public sector, there's not a great single answer. But my word of caution is that don't pay anyone to register to get opportunities. There's lots of people who will try and do that. This is always free, and go straight to the horse's mouth and the government.
Perfect. And yeah, and just the last question that we've got for you now is selling to central government the same as selling to local authorities?
In terms of the sort of risk appetite and what they're looking for, then yes, all of the public sector always wants to see that you are a capable capable and proven supplier, that you've done this before. It's not a step into the dark for you, to satisfy them that you aren't going to fail in what you are promising to do. There can be the local authorities aren't as big users of these frameworks as central government are, so that you might build up a relationship with a local authority, and then when it comes to contract, the local authority might be saying, well, we're going to put this out to tender, at which point you might then be smartly thinking, well, reminding them and pointing them to DOS or the G Cloud, and then say, why don't you use one of these frameworks? We are on them, and this is a much quicker route for you to get to a contract, and it's much easier for us to bid on them. So there is a bit of a difference in approach, but ultimately the risk appetite and what they're looking for is the same.
Perfect. And we'll make this the last question now. It's just come through from one of the viewers, is when a contract's put out to tender into a contract win, how long does the process normally take? Is there a rough average?
There is. I mean, it takes for DOS and G Cloud, this should all be wrapped up within a month, which is very fast for the public sector. If we're talking much more widely and it was fully going out to the market, it might be 6 months, might be 9 months for a big complicated tender. So it's very different things, and that's one of the advantages of these two frameworks, that they're very quick.
Definitely an advantage for a small business as well at the same time. But yeah, thank you, John, for taking the time to